Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Wednesday. This is Seattle Now. There's a Seattle architecture trend that you may have noticed in your neighborhood, a skybridge that connects two homes on a single piece of property.
I think we're going to look back at this time and think of this as a very distinctive, specifically 2020's architecture marker.
We'll learn more from freelance journalist Jane C. Hu in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. The King County Council is considering a proposed supplemental budget that would add more security and police officers to Metro buses. The $26 million proposal would add 9 transit officers for a total of 89, support the existing increase in transit security officers, and fund larger, stronger operator safety partitions on Metro buses. King 5 reports that the murder of Metro bus driver Sean Yim in late 2024 was a driving force in the discussion to propose more funding. Seattle Public Schools is delaying its plan to put a police officer on the Garfield High School campus next year. The Seattle Times reports that SPS was originally going to ask the school board to update a safety policy to allow for an officer at tonight's meeting. But acting Superintendent Fred Podesta now wants an opportunity for community engagement before proceeding with putting an officer on campus. Podesta told the Times that the change in plans may mean the program isn't ready for the start of next school year. And if you're planning on camping for the holiday weekend, the Washington Department of Natural Resources would like you to do so safely. This morning at 11, DNR will provide an update on the 2025 wildfire season and provide some tips for wildfire prevention. July 2nd is also National Wildland Firefighter Day, and Washington DNR is planning to honor the state's active and fallen wildland firefighters. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. The humble skybridge. You may have noticed them in neighborhoods throughout Seattle. 3 properties on a single lot, 2 of them connected by a skybridge. Doesn't make a ton of sense from a design standpoint, but from an affordability standpoint, they have something going for them because the skybridge has offered an alluring workaround for developers in recent years to maximize the amount of living space on a single lot. Freelance journalist Jane C. Hu has written about this growing trend of 3-pack developments for the New York Times. She's here to tell us more. Jane, really glad you're here. Thanks for coming in.
Good to see you, Trish. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So first off, for listeners who haven't seen one of these, what do these sky bridges look like?
So some people have described them as umbilical cords connecting 2 separate units on a lot. So it essentially looks like a little bit of a bridge that's either on the second floor with nothing below it, or the first floor kind of just looks like an empty hallway connecting 2 units.
Okay. And this has to do with ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, and a policy change around them. Let's talk about that change.
Yeah, that's right. So in 2019, Seattle changed its ADU laws. So before 2019, you were allowed to have an ADU in your backyard, but the owner had to live on the premises as well. You also had to have an off-street parking space devoted to that specific unit. So functionally, a lot of the people who lived in those ADUs were, like family members, or people who were using them as like office spaces or studios. But in 2019, they changed the rules so that there could be 2 ADUs on a lot, as long as one of them was attached to the house and then another one could be detached. The attached unit is where this little umbilical cord skybridge situation comes in. Developers were realizing that it could really maximize the space on a lot to have what was technically a single-family home, build an attached ADU via skybridge or little hallway on the first floor, and then have a third unit that's just the detached unit, and you could have this little 3-pack.
Okay. All right. Really interesting. And now that we're talking about it, I've seen these all over my neighborhood in North Seattle. Are they showing up in single-family neighborhoods?
For sure, yeah. So actually, the city has a website called AD Universe, which I think is great. But it includes where all of the new approved ADU permits have been. And I actually just did some boots on the ground reporting, like knocking on people's doors, trying to talk to them about what it's like to live there. And yeah, before that, I had really not noticed how many 3-packs there were around town. I live up by Green Lake, and just walking around the neighborhood with my dog, I have seen so many now that I've started reporting on it.
Did you talk to anybody in the three packs?
Yes.
What did they tell you?
So most of them were youngish people who were looking for a single family home, but discovered that these three packs often offered a slightly better deal for them. And I mean, one of them actually told me that she kind of liked not having a yard because it was less to take care of. And one person told me, interestingly, that it was a little bit of a challenge trying to get the systems and utilities set up. Just because, these three houses are built on the space that was originally designed for one. And a lot of utilities like USPS and also internet companies don't quite know how to deal with that yet.
Interesting.
And so it was a little bit of a challenge trying to figure out how to navigate all of that. But for the most part, people report that they enjoy, having this slightly cheaper option available to them as they were looking for housing.
It's really interesting, and it makes me wonder if this three-pack situation is a loophole that developers are taking advantage of.
So it's not exactly a loophole in that it technically complies with all city ordinances.
Yeah.
However, talking with folks at the city, they had mentioned that this was not something they necessarily planned for. Developers did get creative in interpreting what it means to have an attached unit. And it sounds like the city also was anticipating, though, that there might be some creativity involved and that they had purposely left open what that definition of attached actually means. So one question that I had going into this was when I was seeing these sky bridges, I was like, what are people doing with that space?
Yeah.
And also, is there a door connecting it? Is it like a weird hotel situation? You know how sometimes you see that door and it's locked and you're like, I guess I could get into the adjoining unit. But what I learned is, for the most part, developers just drywall that connection point. And usually they insulate it really well, too, so that there's not too much cross noise. And then what they've done with it in a lot of cases is tried to make it living space that is usable, but that people are not really spending time in, right? You're not using it as a living room area. One person told me it was where they kept their laundry machines. Another person said it's where they put an office. Or another person said that they were pretty sure that's where all the utilities were because they didn't feel like they actually had access to that space.
Interesting. Whether or not you like the skybridge look, Seattle definitely needs more housing, Jane. Are these three-pack developments increasing the housing supply?
That is an open question. So I think that was the original intent of passing ADU reform, was to use land that wasn't going to be used for any other type of housing to be able to build on it. But what I found in my reporting is, in talking to developers, that a lot of them seem to be shifting their strategy from building, say, townhomes to building ADUs instead. And that's due to another city ordinance that got passed in 2019 with the mandatory housing affordability.
Oh, yeah.
So essentially what that does is developers who are building on certain areas have to either set aside some of those units to be affordable housing, or they have to pay into a fund.
Okay.
And for the most part, single-family homes are in zones that are exempt from that. And so these developers had mentioned that it's actually cheaper for them to, instead of building, say, a 4-unit townhome and having to pay into that fund or build some affordable housing, it's actually cheaper to just build a 3-pack because you get around some of those fees.
So they're intentionally going to neighborhoods where they don't have these kinds of MHA rules.
Yeah. And actually, I talked with some researchers who have looked at this as well. They essentially looked at where the lines are between single-family zoning and areas that are subject to the MHA and areas that aren't. And they found that essentially it seemed like developers were switching which side of the line that they're building on.
What does that say, Jane?
There's a mix of incentives at play here, and that developers have decided that it is maybe to their advantage to try and avoid some of those fees if they can.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well, we talked a little bit about the people who live inside these 3-packs. What about the reaction from neighbors who live around these types of developments?
I think it's mixed. I mean, as you probably know, just from living here.
I've seen council meetings, Jane. I know what's up in this city.
Some people are excited about the density and the fact that Seattle is, building in areas that might not otherwise be built in. Other folks have told me that they hate the architecture. A lot of them have this boxier, more modern architecture that I think is divisive. And then other people are, I guess, more concerned about what this says about the bigger picture of zoning in Seattle. The fact that ADUs are being able to be built are, as we've been talking about, the result of changing city ordinances. And there are actually some new ordinances coming up that might allow for even more building. So for a lot of folks, ADUs are kind of a symptom of this greater change that's happening. And people are concerned that that increased density is, potentially changing neighborhood character or is going to cut down trees.
You also pointed out in your story that these 3-packs are essentially little mini condo associations.
That's right. Yeah.
Maybe you've got to be ready for neighbors who are very close by. You're almost living in a condo, really.
Yes. No, it's true. I feel like a lot of them share space. A lot of the people that I talked to said that they are pretty close with their neighbors in some cases, or even if they're not, close, like friend-wise, have to be close because as part of a condo association, you have to be in touch with each other a little bit. One person that I talked to mentioned that they actually had a hard time getting homeowners insurance because they and their neighbor technically shared a wall and then I think also shared liability for their driveway. So trying to get a plan for that, it seems like a lot of business to go into with your neighbors. And also you can imagine just in theory, like if you have neighbors and you're all sharing utilities or you just have such a close shared space, if someone is slacking on, saying, paying a bill or taking ownership of the space, then it seems like time for a hard conversation.
It's almost like having roommates without actually having roommates.
Yeah, you better hope that you stay on good terms with your neighbors.
That's a lot of communication for a city like Seattle.
Yes,
to be
for
honest.
sure.
All right, well, finally, Jane, the rules about ADUs just changed this week, in fact, due to a state law that requires cities to follow certain zoning rules. Developers who want to build a 3-pack in Seattle no longer have to attach that ADU to the house. So is this the end of the skybridge?
It could be. I mean, it always takes a while for those trends to actually play out. Like, I imagine that there are plenty of skybridge houses still under construction right now, right? So probably for the next year or two, we're probably going to continue to see some new ones popping up. But yeah, with this change in rules, it's probably no longer really that much of an incentive for developers to try and attach these units. I mean, and also from talking with real estate agents, it seems like sometimes that's a hard sell, or people are not necessarily turning down buying these houses because they're connected. But I think it does often give people pause to wonder, well, do I want to deal with all of that?
It certainly is a different living situation, but the calculus for getting into housing in the city is also really extreme, too. So maybe for some people, it doesn't seem that bad.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it's tough because, this is one thing that comes up also with talking with neighbors about how they feel about these ADUs. A lot of them have this question of, well, if the idea is that this is going to increase housing stock and drive housing costs down, is this really achieving that? Because these houses are still not cheap compared to the single family home that a lot of these ADUs are around on that lot. They are slightly cheaper, but they're still, I wouldn't call them affordable housing necessarily for a lot of people in Seattle.
Jane Sihu is a freelance journalist based in Seattle. Her latest piece is published in the New York Times. Jane, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now, and big thanks to our newest financial supporters, Chris and Laura. You mean the world to us. Today's episode was produced by Andy Hurst. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Vaughn Jones, Shane Mailing, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you later.